Well, it's amazing to look out and then see that Jane Goodall is actually with us from her home in Bournemouth. It's amazing to see you, Dr. Goodall. Yes. And I want to, as we're all gathered here, Jane, I want you to meet our other rabbis here who are extraordinary. So Rabbi Singer and Rabbi Gelman, this community knows them well, but you might not have met them quite yet. So if you could just come on over and just say hi.
Yes, we can. Hi. Oh, there we go.
And so, well, maybe you should just say hi.
Your faces. Hello.
Oh, hello. Such a pleasure. Such an honor. Really.
It's great to meet both of you virtually.
Yes.
And Jay, we want you to know that we're not only going to be having a conversation with you and hearing from you in just a moment, but that following this, we're actually going to meet with other organizations who have created change in your image. And so in that way, then we have Hazon, the Jewish Lab for Sustainability, that we're going to be able to see how we can get active with them. Eco Circle International, you met their founders just a few moments ago, and all of us are going to be able to meet with them. Jewish Earth Alliance, as well as Climate Reality Project, Faith in Place, and Green Faith. And I know that you also had an opportunity to meet some of the wonderful people in the city of Chicago who represent us. And they not only represent the people of Chicago, but by representing us, they make sure that we are doing things that are good for the environment. And so State Representative Ann Williams of the 11th District and Illinois Senator Sarah Feigenholtz are with us today. And I don't know if you want to just, kind of stand and say hi. And we also have Hannah Kreischer with us, who is Representative Williams' Chief of Staff. Could you just, let everybody know that you're here? They are beloved. I also, Jane, you haven't had a chance to meet yet, but they had a chance to see you. Terry and Roger Rudish, who have done so much for today's event. And so we want to thank them and show our gratitude. As well as Karen Lewis, who's the founder of Eco Habura, who has helped us green our entire synagogue and beyond. And I also just want to say that it's wonderful to have a member of our community who is 17 years old, who is the founder of an international organization, Eco Circle International. She's here today with Georgia Scar and Kieran. Kieran, tell me, I didn't bring up here my note on your last name. And Kieran Johnson. So we have Kieran Johnson, Georgia Scar, and Chloe Young with us. And if you could just stand and let everyone meet you. Truly extraordinary, the way that they bridge education with tangible action. Oh, you see what you've inspired, Jane? And so much more, and so much more. And so if you would not mind, I'd love to I know we've already told you a lot about Bruce and Jan. You had a chance to meet the Trannons a little bit earlier, and you're going to have another opportunity to really speak with them. But I want everybody here to know that Bruce Trannon and Jan Trannon have a story about courage and wanting to make sure that we all summon the courage that we have within us in order to, when we see social issues that seem insurmountable, that we see that we have the courage to be able to face them and do something about them. And so I want to say that today is so special because you've made this happen, Bruce and Jan, but also that I love this way in which you have inspired us to be courageous. And then we're courageous enough to invite the Jane Goodall to be with us, to inspire us to have hope with action. And so, So can we just hear it for our amazing Bruce and Jan Trannon, whom we love so deeply. So So Jane, I loved the way that your student and now extraordinary professor, Ben, had introduced you in a church where he said, you need no introduction. And then you just spoke. But I do feel like I'd like to take a moment just to give a little bit of an introduction to you. Would you mind?
No.
So Dr. Jane Goodall, DBE, founder of the Jane Goodall Institute, was born on April 3rd, 1934 in London, England. And at the age of 26, she followed her passion for animals and for Africa to Gombe, Tanzania, where she began her landmark study of chimpanzees in the wild. You immersed yourself in their habitat as a neighbor, rather just an objective or distant observer. And your discovery in 1960 that chimpanzees make and use tools, well, it rocked the scientific world and it redefined the relationship between humans and animals. In 1977, you, Jane, established the Jane Goodall Institute, JGI, which continues the field research in Gombe and builds on Dr. Goodall's, your innovative approach to conservation, which recognizes the central role that people play in the well-being of animals and the environment. In 1991, you founded Roots and Shoots, a global program that empowers young people in over 65 countries to become informed conservation leaders that the world so urgently needs. And I just want to say that 30 years on, this means that well over 1 million young people have been impacted by this program and have taken conservation and environmental principles and priorities into their professional lives as they have assumed positions in government and other leadership. Jane, alongside her foundation, even collaborated with NASA to use satellite imagery from Landsat to remedy the effects of deforestation on chimpanzees and local communities in Western Africa by offering the villagers information on how to reduce activity and preserve their environment. Today, Dr. Goodall emphasizes the interconnectedness of all living things and the collective power of individual action through hope. Dr. Goodall is a UN Messenger of Peace and Dame Commander of the British Empire. Without further ado, Dr. Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And before we start a conversation, let me just in a nutshell explain how it is that a very, very shy little girl growing up in the house where I speak to you from today became, I don't quite know what I am, but it's nothing I aspired to be. How did it happen? I grew up loving animals. I had a supportive mother. And when I was growing up, I was born in 1934. There was no television, none of this social media, nothing like that. I had books and nature. Those were my teachers. And a wise mother who got me books about animals, thinking that would make me learn to read more quickly, which it did. So when I was 10 years old, having read Dr. Dolittle, and if you don't know Dr. Dolittle, you should, and Tarzan of the Apes, not the films, no, the book. And I fell in love with this glorious Lord of the Jungle and thought, that I was very jealous because I thought he married the wrong Jane. He did. So when I was 10 years old, my dream was I will grow up, go to Africa, live with wild animals and write books about them. No thought of being a scientist. Girls weren't scientists like that in those days. Everybody laughed at me. How will you do that? You're just a girl. Africa's far away. It's potentially dangerous. And World War II is raging. Dream about something you can achieve, but not my amazing mother. She said to me something which I have repeated to young people all around the world, particularly those in disadvantaged communities. If you really want to do something like this, you're going to have to work really hard, take advantage of every opportunity, And if you don't give up, maybe you find a way. Well, I left school. There was no money for university. All my friends went there, but we couldn't afford it. We had just enough money for a boring secretarial course. But I did that. And then came opportunity. A school friend, her parents had moved to Kenya. She invited me for a holiday. I had a job in London by then. I left London because you couldn't save money there. I came home. I worked as a waitress in a hotel around the corner there until I'd saved up enough money for a return fare to Kenya by boat in those days. That's how long I've lived. There were no planes going back and forth back then. And I stayed with my friend, and then I heard about Louis Leakey. Somebody said, if you're interested in animals, you should meet him. So I went to meet him, and cutting a long story short, he decided I was the person he'd been looking for to go and study chimpanzees. Nobody had done it. And it was an unknown world. It was amazing. The reason that I met Louis Leakey and got gathered into his community of people interested in the environment was because the day before I met him, his secretary had suddenly quit, and he needed a secretary. And there I was, that boring secretarial training. I mean, you never know when something may be significant along our life's pathway. Anyway, he sent me off to Gombe, 26 by then. When I first went to Kenya, I was 23, which I think back then we were very naive. It was about like a girl today of 16 or 17. Anyway, never mind. I got to Gombe and eventually got the chimpanzees used to me. And then I was sent to Cambridge University by Leakey to get a PhD degree because he said we haven't got time to mess with an undergraduate degree. And I was told by the professors I'd done everything wrong. I couldn't talk about chimps with personality, mind, or emotion. Those were unique to us, I was told. But I had a wonderful teacher as a child who had taught me that those professors in this respect were wrong. And that teacher was my dog, Rusty. You can't share your life, can you, in a meaningful way with any animal and not know we are not the only beings of the planet with personalities, minds, and emotions. So eventually I got to know all the different chimpanzees, learned about their lives, got my PhD in spite of the professors, built up a little research station. Best days of my life out in the rainforest. Why did I leave? Because in 1986, there was a conference. By then, there were 6 other chimp study sites around Africa. We brought the researchers together in Chicago, right there in Chicago, with the Academy of Sciences. And it was basically about chimp behavior. Did it differ in different environments? Was it the same? But we also had a session on conservation. Shocking. Right across, everywhere chimps were studied, forests were dying, chimp numbers were decreasing. We had a session on conditions in some captive situations. The worst was seeing secretly filmed video of our closest living relatives, highly social, sharing 98.7% of our DNA, confined in 5-foot by 5-foot cages in medical research, because their bodies are so like ours that they can be infected with our diseases that other animals less like us cannot be infected with. By people who absolutely refuse to think about the psychological and behavioral similarities. So I left that conference. I mean, I went as a scientist. I left as an activist. I didn't know what to do, but I had to do something. Got together a bit of money, visited the various research sites for chimpanzees around Africa, learned a lot about the problems facing the chimps, but also the problems faced by so many of the African people who live in and around chimpanzee habitat, the crippling poverty, lack of health and education facilities, degradation of the land. as their populations grew. Came to a head when I flew over the tiny Gombe National Park, where, by the way, we're still doing our research. It's in its 62nd year. But when I began in 1960, the Gombe National Park was part of a great forest equatorial belt that stretched across Africa. By 1987, it was a tiny island of forest surrounded by completely bare hills. More people living there than the land could support, too poor to buy food from elsewhere, struggling to survive. And that's when it hit me. If we don't help these people find ways of making a living without destroying the environment, we can't save chimps, forests, or anything else. So that's when the Jane Goodall Institute, JGI, began our program to help the villages, which is very holistic. It's now in 6 other African countries. And while I'm trying to raise money and awareness around the world, I'm meeting young people, high school, university, who back then in 1991 had already lost hope. They told me, well, we feel angry, we feel depressed, we feel apathetic because you've compromised our future. Nothing we can do about it. We haven't just compromised the future of our young people, we've been stealing it. We're still stealing it today. Is it true there's nothing that can be done? No. We have a window of time. That's when Roots and Truths began, a program which involves young people from kindergarten through university, even adults now, even in prisons, even in senior citizen retirement homes, but basically for young people. Main message, every one of us makes an impact on the planet every single day. We get to choose the impact we make. And every group will choose 3 projects to make the world better. One to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment. So that's how this little shy girl growing up right here in Bournemouth became this kind of international personality, which I never wanted, but which happened to me. And that's in a nutshell why I do what I do.
Thank you, Jane. So when we spoke this past Thursday, you and I both agreed that there was no way to gather without mentioning Ukraine and about the tragic atrocities terrorizing not just a nation, but a people. And the aerial footage and names of cities and towns have a certain resonance for many American Jews whose families are Ashkenazi and whose families fled pogroms over a century ago from just those same places. Now, in the past decades, these same places have provided safe haven to Ukrainian Jews. So like the rest of the world, we are heartbroken by the carnage and horror of all residing in, fleeing from, and fighting in defense of Ukraine. So I find myself coming back to the teachings of the Rebbes from that region. And I'll say that while that Ashkenazi experience speaks to some of us, of course, that's not all of the American Jews, but there is that particular resonance. So one teaching, a prayer especially resonant for our conversation today, is this one from Rebbe Nachman. He said, "Grant me the ability to be alone. May it be my custom to go outdoors each day among the trees and grass, among all growing things, and there may I be alone and enter into prayer, to talk with the one to whom I belong. May I express there everything in my heart, and may all the foliage of the field, all grasses, trees, and plants awake at my coming, to send the powers of their life into the words of my prayer, so that my prayer and speech are made whole through the life and the spirit of all growing things, which are made as one by their transcendent source." So we pray to that transcendent source to bring peace. We also know how much it is that we pray that soon all those who are suffering will be able to go outside and be alone with the trees and all living beings and feel that transcendent source in their lives. So Rabbi Nachman in Ukraine shared this Jewish prayer in the 18th century. And yet I think it says so much to the two of us today, and probably to all of us. Can you talk about the first time the natural world had its effect on you, Jane?
Well, when I was a very young child growing up here in Bournemouth, out there is a beech tree. And the beech tree was my favorite tree. I called him just Beech. And I spent hours and hours up in Beech. I felt close to the birds in the sky and part of nature. And then, life intervened, that I had to make a living and get a job and be in London and be a young girl growing up there. Then finally I got to Gombe, my dream come true. And out in the forest, I felt this really, really deep spiritual connection with the natural world. So I totally identified that prayer of that very wise man. Not that I would have put it in those words. For me, this spiritual connection with the natural world is a driving force, because we humans, with our absurd idea that there can be unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources, we're destroying the planet. We're using up natural resources in some areas faster than nature can replenish them. And if we carry on in this way, then we're doomed. So it's my love of the animals, my love of biodiversity that keeps me so passionate, because I want to work to save nature from human destruction. Partly because I love nature, but partly because we're part of the natural world. We depend on it for food, air, clean water, and all the rest of it. And as we destroy it, we get closer and closer to the point where, for our children and their children and theirs, the future is bleak. So we have to get together and take action now before it's too late.
I was studying with our high school students this past Wednesday night. We were looking at a comparison between the first generation story in the book of Genesis and the second Genesis story, the second story of creation. And the first one is so much that human beings are made in concert with this world, that it's very much about being all of us in this together. It's not until we get to the second version where you see that it seems like it's humans first, and they want to talk about civilizations, those civilizations that are now putting that natural world in peril. And I'll say that something that I appreciate so much is this Jewish teaching, which you actually might have heard before, where God takes Adam and Eve around the Garden of Eden. Just before they leave the Garden of Eden, they're exiled from there. And God says, pay attention to each one of these trees, each one of these animals, because this earth, well, there's only one. And you are the caretakers in concert with all beings to be able to make sure that this world stays safe. And I feel like that's what you live each and every day. And that's what you inspire us to try to do.
Yeah, when you bring up that second story of Genesis, there's a mistranslation. You would know better than me, but I've been told by my Jewish friends that this is true, that there's a mistranslation from the original Hebrew of the word which has been translated as dominion. Man was given dominion over the birds of the air, etc. But actually, the real translation is stewardship.
The real translation is future?
Yeah.
Stewardship, absolutely. The root of it is radad, reish dalid dalid, which really does mean to steward. And when we think about stewardship, it's much more of a partnership, learning from, and it's not just trying to make it bow to our will. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that.
And don't you think it's weird that, the one thing that makes us more different from chimps than anything else, because we're like them in so many of us, gestures and postures and all the rest of it, they're loving of their family, they have long-term family relations, they have kissing, embracing, holding hands, they even have a kind of primitive war, but they're compassionate and altruistic too. But the one thing that makes us more different from them and other animals is the explosive development of our intellect. Other animals are way more intelligent than science used to admit, but still, there isn't a single living animal that could create a rocket that went up to Mars, from which prepped a little robot to take photographs. We don't want to go and live on Mars. At one time it was thought maybe it would support life as we know it. We know now that's not true. We've got this one beautiful blue and green planet, a little dot in the vast blackness of space. And it's our only home. So how is it possible that this most intellectual creature is destroying its only home? And is it because we've lost something that I call wisdom, where you make a decision not based on this will help me now, this will help the next shareholders meeting, this will help my next political campaign, but how will this affect the next generation? How will this affect the health of the planet? And I truly believe it's only when head and heart work together, brains, love, and passion, that we can attain our true human potential, which is huge. We know that.
Absolutely. Well, and I think no one could say it better, and nobody lives it better than you. And I'll say that, interestingly, the way in which we used to conceive of where did thought come from, but from the heart. And what does that mean? It means that actually, if we really want to understand something, we don't just use our intellect. We actually also have to use our emotional intellect in order to find both empathy and pay enough attention to not overrun, let that empathy run rampant, so that we don't actually understand what another being is actually going through based on our experience, what we think they're going through. And so for that, we need to use a huge heart and keen observation in the ways that you have throughout your life.
Well, it was again my mother. She used to teach me, if you meet somebody that you disagree with, number one, listen to them. Listen to what they have to say. Then you better understand where they're coming from. Maybe they've got some ideas that you never thought about. But secondly, if you still think you're at least more right than them, then you must have the courage of your conviction. So I meet, like, I don't know, politicians or heads of businesses. And there's absolutely no point in being aggressive. There's no point in telling them they're bad people and they've got to change. What you have to do is to persuade them to change from within. How do you do that? You have to reach the heart. How do you reach the heart? Not by battering at the brain, but by finding a story that will reach into the heart. Telling stories is so very important. But to tell the right story, you have to have empathy with the person. You have to be prepared to think, well, maybe they think this way through ignorance. Maybe they never learned what I have the privilege of learning. So let's give them the benefit of the doubt and find a story that will resonate with them.
Well, and I love that you bring this up, because I wanted to ask you about your own experience having this idyllic early childhood, but then, of course, knowing the horrors of World War II and how that shaped you, and how your mother helped you continue to persevere in the world through empathy.
Well, I mean, she was completely amazing. First of all, as I said, I came face to face with human evil when the images were survivors of the Holocaust, and then reading about the horrors of the Holocaust. And at the end of the war, this sort of euphoria, okay, we now know the worst, it'll never happen again. And what, unfortunately, that wasn't true. We've seen it again and again and again. It seems there's something in us, there's some, I don't know, it's almost like a war between good and evil. But what my mother did that I think was so amazing, after the war, you know, during the war, the sound of a German voice made you shiver because it was the Nazis. And if you heard a German voice, they were coming to arrest you or put you in prison or kill you. But after the war, when a family in Germany wanted somebody to teach their children English, Mum let me go. I didn't ask to go. She kind of pushed me to go. Why? She wanted me to understand that just because of Hitler and the Nazis, it didn't mean that all Germans were bad people. And that's what's happening now. Russia is being branded, all the Russian people, the wonderful Russian people who hate the war as much as anybody else, but they're being branded. And these poor Russian boats, they're not being allowed to land. And it's not their fault that Putin is there as a sort of Hitler of Russia.
I mean, that kind of empathy where your mom knew, make sure to be able to see that a government doesn't represent all the people. The people are the people, and have your own experiences and be able to learn from them. It's so powerful to hear those words today. I know that Dr. Doolittle shaped your dreams, but Professor Louis Leakey really enabled those dreams to come true. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how that connection ever came about and what you think he saw in you that was the spark of the scientist that you became.
Well, first of all, I just heard about him. Somebody said, if you are interested in animals, you should know Louis Leakey. So shy as I wasn't shy when it came to following my dream. And I went to meet him at the Natural History Museum. And that's when I say, he'd lost his secretary and he took me on. So I was in the world of people who could answer all my questions about the animals and the plants and of Africa. What did he see in me? He let me go with him on an expedition, just his wife and one other young girl, and I think 5 Kenyans, searching for the fossilized remains of early humans, because that was his field. And in those days, we're going back now, 1957, all the animals were on the Serengeti, all of them. I mean, and this other one young girl and I, we were allowed out in the evening onto the plain, just walking. And Leakey always said, well, if you don't hurt the animals, they won't hurt you. So one evening we met a rhino, I mean, really close. And he knew there was something, but they don't see very well. And the tail went up, it trotted back and forth, making it snort. And then luckily ran off in the other direction. And then one evening it was a young male lion. And he followed us for about, the length of 2 football pitches, however long that is. And it was a bit scary, but it was so exciting. And Gillian wanted to go down into the thicket of the scrub at the bottom of the gorge. And I said, no, Gillian, because the lion will know where we are, but we won't know where the lion is. We need to go up onto the open plains. So that's what we did. And Leakey felt that I'd done the right thing. And that's when he decided I was the person he'd been looking for to go and study chimpanzees. He wanted chimpanzees studied because he believed that about 6 million years ago, there was a common ancestor, an ape-like, human-like creature. And that from that ape-like, human-like common ancestor, chimps had developed in this way, humans had developed in that way. So he thought, if Jane finds behavior that's similar in chimps today and humans today, humans probably brought it with them on their long evolutionary pathway. And that would help him to better understand the behavior of the fossil human, pre-humans that he was finding. That's why he wanted me to go and study chimps. fortunately for me.
And then you changed the world.
That happened. That was nothing to do with me, was it?
Yes, it was to do with you. So I'll say, Jane, that we made the special announcement last week at religious school that you were going to be coming here, and so we actually have now our religious school convened today, right now, to be able for them to hear from you. And there were two twins who came up to me, 7-year-olds, Kayla and Shira Rishel, who wanted to make sure that they could ask you a question today. So here they are to ask their questions.
My name is Shira, and I'm a big fan of you, Jane Goodall, and I love animals. And my question was, what was your favorite thing doing with the chimpanzees? By Jane Goodall.
Yeah.
Hi,
Can
Jane.
you tell me the question?
And
Yes.
my question
Wait.
is,
So now I just should say, we'll play it one more time, that then Kayla comes on. And if you would pay special attention, and I'll repeat their question. They ask the same question. I'll repeat their question, but just pay attention to the picture, the portrait that's on the wall next to Kayla.
My name is Shira, and I'm a big fan of you, Jane Goodall, and I love animals. And my question was, what was your favorite thing doing with the chimpanzees? By Jane Goodall. Hi, Jane. My name is Kayla. I'm a big fan of you, and my question is, what is your favorite memory with being with the chimpanzees?
Okay.
My favorite part of being with the chimpanzees was being able to spend time alone in the rainforest with them. And when you're alone in nature, you can be part of nature. If you're with another human being, even somebody you love, you're two human beings in nature. If you're alone, you forget that you're a human. You're simply a part of nature. And it's a very, very strong spiritual connection that with a great spiritual power, which I think a part of that, a little spark of that spiritual power animates every life form on the planet.
Wow. And I just, I love your sharing this at a time where so many of us have been in isolation for some time. And while we haven't been out in nature necessarily, we've been alone. And for you to reframe what it is to be alone, from feeling lonely to feeling connected to the bigger powers within this world, it's really moving. Thank you. And I appreciate that you talk about this transformation in some ways, the spiritual transformation that you had in Gombe. And I also appreciate the other transformation that happened to you, where you went into the conference in Chicago in 1986, going in as a scientist and leaving as an activist. And I just wonder if you could share with us a little bit about what happened to you there and how it might be a lesson in our own consciousness, knowing that a lot of us have professions that then enable us to have expertise in an area, but we don't always see that as then an opportunity to then act on it in a larger sense, to say, what did we learn? And then how do we make our world better from what we've learned?
Well, I'd love to answer that the way you asked it, but it didn't happen that way. You know the story of St. Paul on the road to Damascus, that he started off persecuting the early Christians. He ended up being a missionary for them in a way. It was like that. I didn't make any, people say it must have been a very hard decision for you to leave the Gombe that you love and the rainforest and the chimps. But it wasn't. It was like something within me changed. So that, yes, I went at my PhD. I had a research station. I loved working with the students. I was beginning to give lectures. I'd written about the chimp behavior. But when I left, I just knew something, my path had changed. And I didn't know what to do about it. I just knew I had to do something. And, you know, 2 long battles, one which is ongoing, I mean, totally ongoing, trying to save the world from the people who would destroy it out of greed. But the other one was getting the chimpanzees out of medical research. Took years and years and years, and other organizations helped. But now every single American chimp that was in medical research is in a sanctuary.
Just extraordinary.
And it was, you know, what's interesting though, very important, it wasn't because the research, it wasn't stopped on ethical reasons. It was stopped because every single experiment being done on chimps, when investigated by a team from NIH, was found to be neither useful nor potentially useful for human beings. And this is true of so much animal research. It is not useful, and sometimes it negatively impacts human health.
Well, that they share 98.7% of our DNA, yet their immune systems function so differently. And then to think that we do animal research on animals who have less of a commonality of our DNA, and it gives us such little useful information. But I do believe also in the way that you told stories to those scientists and that you met with them, that also changed things. I don't think things would have changed otherwise. And I just want to say a couple of things that I watched that stunning documentary, The Hope, and really in it, there were these ways that really struck me that there would be the most heartbreaking situations that you would hear about. And instead of running from them, you ran to see them with your own eyes. So that in the late 1980s, when you heard about the conditions of chimpanzees in Brazzaville Zoo, who these chimps were just being shown at a point then that many of them would die of starvation, you went there to see it with your own eyes. And then when you heard about the scientific experiments being done on chimps, 3,000 of them in the US alone, that were isolated from each other in cages and subjected to horrific treatment, you went there. So the question that I want to ask you is, how did you summon the strength to go to those places to bear witness? And then how did you know how to make change from what you saw?
I didn't know. I didn't know. There was some inner voice guiding me. I felt that if I want to share this experience with people, I have to see it with my own eyes, because otherwise I can't feel it. And if you don't feel the emotion, you can't really share the horror of it. And so I suppose some inner voice drove me to go and see with my own eyes what was going on in those medical research labs. And you know, when I first went into a lab, which was one of the most horrible experiences I've ever had, and when I came out of going around that lab and seeing the horror, the head people of NIH were sitting around a table, and I realized they were waiting for me to say something. I didn't know what to say to them. I was very naive and young back then. And so I said, the first thing that came to me, sometimes when I don't know what to say, I just open my mind and let a message come. I said, well, I'm sure that every caring and compassionate human being would feel as I feel about the conditions of those chimps. They could very well admit they weren't caring and compassionate.
Right.
Because I sat down with them and then we talked about, you know, and I showed pictures. I didn't blame them. Some of them had never even seen a chimp. They just asked for blood and you know, stuff like that. So I showed pictures of the Gombe chimps. I could see that they were somehow feeling different. And so we had meetings and we talked about ways of doing things better and at least enriching the environments of the chimps and giving them bigger cages. The animal rights group wouldn't speak to me. How can you sit down with those evil people? How can you have a cup of tea with them? And I'm thinking, if you don't talk to people, how can you ever expect them to change? So like I said before,
Just so you know, Jane, you got an applause for that. You might not have heard it.
No, I didn't.
Well, we can then let you know.
Thank you. Thank you. But you know, that's I just did it because it seemed to be the right thing to do. And
I think the reason why it resonated so much here is that we're living in a country where there's so much polarization that the notion of sitting down and hearing from people really means a lot. It has special resonance for us. So thank you that you did that so naturally. And you know what? I think that possibly we have to be unnatural and try to be more like you. So I did go back to our real human nature and rely back on that and be more like you, Jane. You know, I wanted to also hear about how you did this in Brazzaville with the zoo and then the sanctuary. How did you know what steps to take? So you say you didn't, and yet I think also that notion of sitting down with others whom usually you wouldn't think to sit down with and seeing others that you actually were able to then do something there too.
Well, it just evolved kind of gradually. I heard about this zoo. People told me I shouldn't go and see it because I'd be upset. Well, I had to go and see it. And it was absolutely shocking. All the animals were starving. The zoo would basically buy an animal for a few pennies from a hunter, and they basically wouldn't feed them. When they died, they would eat them and they would pay a few more pennies. And hardly anybody went to the zoo. It was awful. And there was one very old gentleman, Gregoire, and I talked to the Minister of the Environment, and he agreed to come to the zoo with me. And he looked at Gregoire. He lost all his hair. He was old. You could see every bone in his body. And because I didn't become aggressive to the ministry or anything like that, he stood, I could see things changing in his mind.
Mm.
He said, Jane, this is our Nelson Mandela, isn't it? And that, from a minister, an African minister, to say that, that was amazing. And again, it shows you that people haven't always understood. They don't really realize. They don't realize that every single animal is a sentient being. Even now we know down to octopuses. And once you actually realize that they feel fear and pain, just like we do, the factory farming, all this terrible factory farming. And I hate to say that killing of animals, I have to mention that because if you are an animal, you know, the golden rule of every single major religion is do to others as you would have them do to you. If we include animals in that, then just think about what we do in the factory farms, think about the trafficking of animals, think about the ivory trade, and it makes you feel heartbroken, literally heartbroken. But it's no good giving up and saying, oh, the problem is too big. Unfortunately, we have young people now all over the world who are rising up through Roots and Shoots and other youth movements, and they are understanding and they are changing the attitude of their parents. And sometimes the parents are, you know, CEOs of big companies, sometimes they're in politics. And so gradually change is creeping around. There's a new awareness, a new understanding. And of course, it's been crushed at the moment by the concern over Ukraine, but it will come back. And so I'm hoping everybody there and all your youth groups that we can collaborate with Roots and Shoots, because we're a growing family around the world. And I think one of the most important things to me about Roots and Shoots, two important things. One, the value required to take an end to adult life. Just, we didn't tell them, but they just have. But one of the most important values is respect. And the young people learn because we try and bring them together virtually, usually, from different parts of the world. Much more important than the color of your skin, your language, your nationality, your culture, your religion, is the fact we're all human beings. We all weep, and cry when we're hurt or sad. We all laugh when we're happy. We all bleed when we're cut. We're all human beings.
Well, I believe that a idea was just a seed was planted here. And so I know that we have Heidi Cooper and Jay Rappaport, whom you met earlier, our director of early childhood engagement and lifelong learning. So I think Roots and Shoots may be in our future here at Temple Sholem if you'd have us. And so
we want to collaborate, that's why we're growing. We're in 65 countries now.
65 countries in Temple Sholem.
Right. Absolutely.
So, before I want to really delve into hope. And as we do, I want to share that Brian Stevenson, who is a great civil rights activist, I don't know if you know him or know of him, but Brian Stevenson, he started the Equal Justice Initiative, and also the legacy, the Lynching Legacy Museum or Memorial, as well as the the Slavery to Mass Incarceration Legacy Museum in Alabama. Well, he actually spoke from this bema to us. And when he did, he gave us a prescription for activism that seems as though he took it from your playbook. So he first said that we need to get proximate, but then whenever there's an issue, we actually need to go for ourselves and see it up close. And then he said that what we need to do from there is change the narrative. That too many times somebody already is thinking in a certain way, and because they've not gotten proximate, they don't know what the true story is. So now change the narrative, and then choose to do uncomfortable things. That to change this world, we must go out of our comfort zones. Shy Jane, who nobody would believe that anymore. And then most of all, he says, protect hopefulness. That really this world can't change if we don't have enough hope to change it. And so, the question that I want to ask, firstly, I see from your nods that he took it from your playbook. I'll let him know the next time we speak. But and when he spoke to us, we were really talking about racial justice. But I think that prescription could hold for any issue, including environmentalism. And so my question to you is, could you articulate how you began to articulate your own ideas around hope, and how hope affects your work as both a scientist and an activist?
Well, I think I can make it more general than that, because if you don't have hope, if you don't hope that your actions will have some kind of result, why would you bother to do them? And, you need hope. But if you don't have hope, you fall into apathy. And you know this expression, think globally, act locally. It's the wrong way round. Today, the world is a dark place. Let's face it, environmentally, socially, politically. It's a dark place. And if you think globally, I defy any one of you listening not to feel a bit depressed. You can't help it, can you, when you look around and see what we're doing to this beautiful planet, how we're hurting humans, animals, and the environment. So don't do it that way, right? So when people come to me and say, well, there's nothing I can do and I've lost hope, and I say, well, where do you live? Is there any problem there that you don't like? Oh, yes, I hate the fact there's so many homeless people. Oh, I can't stand it that some of the statements voted letter. Oh, I don't like the way that stray dogs, whatever it is. Okay, go back to your community and see if you can find somebody who feels the same way as you, and then think about it and think, what can I do? So very often when you do that, you find that your little actions in your little community have made a difference. That makes you feel good. And luckily, when you feel good, you want to feel better. So you ramp up your activities and you do more. And the more you do, the more you inspire others and you gather more with you. And it spirals up and outwards until you have a whole community working on different aspects to improve your community. And then when you know, like in Roots and Shoots, well, in 65 other countries, there are young people just like me doing these kind of projects. And then you dare think globally. And so I see, for me, hope is tied in with action. And I see our human race right now. It's as though that we're in the mouth of a very long and very dark tunnel. And right at the end of that tunnel is a little star. That's hope. We can't just look at the mouth of the tunnel and say, I hope the star comes to us. Mm-hmm. We have to, as the Bible says, gird your loins. I love that expression. Not it means, but we've got to gird our loins, roll up our sleeves, and to crawl under, climb over, work our way around all these obstacles between us and that star, like climate change, loss of biodiversity, the pandemic, war, deforestation, pollution of the ocean, whatever it is. And so as we go along this dark tunnel, climbing over these obstacles, we take others with us. We have a great mass of humanity moving to defeat the obstacles and reach hope. Hope is action.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. And I'll just also say that, there's another teaching that when there was only it was a needle, just the eye of a needle, just that big of a pinprick of light, that it says that God can open it to such a degree that wagons of grace can come in. And I like what you're saying is, yes, that's true, as long as we're there tearing that little bit of hope open and that we're going through. Beautiful. Thank you. And so, we had a book group where we read your book together, the Book of Hope, A Survival Guide for Trying Times. And you gave 4 reasons for hope: the amazing human intellect, the resilience of nature, the power of young people, and the indomitable human spirit. And I don't know for you if you could guess which 2 got the most votes, as far as when we asked which one resonates most with you, with the people in the group, which 2 you think they said?
Which 2 do I think?
The people in the group said resonated most with them.
Well, I think, everybody's different. And I think that's one of the kind of fascinating things about human nature and animals too. When I began at Cambridge, I was told I couldn't talk about animal personality because they didn't have personality, which is rubbish. But anyway, different aspects of that will inspire different people. And that's what's so exciting. It's the one benefit of the unsustainable numbers of people on the planet. The one benefit is that there are groups of people to tackle all the different projects, to become inspired by all the different ways that people are coping.
It is so true. And I'll say that as people were talking about it, I received so many emails afterward from people who said, thank you. Thank you for giving me this bit of hope in this dark time. When we talked about this, a lot of people went into reading your book with skepticism, saying, really, really, hope's the thing that we're going to look at. And then from our conversations, all the stories you provide, all the evidence for hope in action that's out there, well, you convinced a whole group of people. And I think today, a whole group of people. So many people said in that group that it was the power of youth that gave them hope, that and the resilience of nature. And I just want to say that there are in this community young people like Mia Barron, who gave a report about fashion pollution. I think we have a little picture of the report that she had done. And what she wanted to do was raise awareness for her class of 3rd graders for how they could actually look at what they buy and think about what it took to be able to make it. And that if there was too much pollution that was made in the making of their clothing, well, then maybe they should think twice about purchasing it. And she said, based on her own research from that, she decided that she would start to go to more resale shops. She, a third grader, start to go to more resale shops and buy less. And so I just love that. And I also wanted to share with you, you met Chloe Young, a 17-year-old member of the congregation who founded and directs a nonprofit organization called Eco Circle International, which is a youth-led organization that bridges the gap between environmental education and tangible action through digital platforms and fellowships. And she'd like to ask you this question.
Hi, my name is Chloe Young, and I'm the co-founder and co-executive director of Eco Circle International. So two of my biggest environmental heroes are you and Greta Thunberg. And you both use quite different strategies to your environmentalism that I believe are both valuable in their own ways. Greta often focuses more on provoking anger, while you tend to inspire hope. Was there ever a time where you felt that immense anger as well? And how did you transform that into hope? Thank you.
Well, good question. Of course, I feel anger. You can't look at some of the things that are going on today and not feel absolutely spitting mad. But I have found the experience and through my own nature, because of the family I grew up with, that being angry, it might sort of shock people, but it doesn't necessarily change them. They may give you lip service. They may not change. I believe people must change from within. So I've never allowed the anger to show, but I've used the anger to push me to do more, to put right whatever it is I'm angry about. Harness the anger. Don't show it. That's the way I operate. But I think the world's in such a mess that probably almost every way that you can tackle the problems going to help in some cases.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful question, Chloe, and thank you for that beautiful response, Jane. I have just one last question that I want to ask before we close our conversation today. Even though I think all of us could be here, we'd be happy to be here for another few hours with you, Jane. But we know it's very late where you are, and it's time for your scotch. So my last question is, 2 years into a pandemic and other world events that have tried many of our abilities to hope, how have these years shifted your own priorities, and how have they shifted your actions?
Well, when the pandemic began, and I was actually on my way to start yet another of my non-stop tours, I was actually in a car on the way to the airport. My sister ran out and said, "No, Jane, they've closed down the building, so you couldn't come back." It was the United Nations building in Brussels, where I was giving a talk to compassion in world farming. And I was frustrated and angry. And then I thought, well, that's not much use. So with my little team from the Jane Goodall Institute, we created Virtual Jane. Virtual Jane has never, ever worked so hard in her life. I haven't had one day off. I haven't had one weekend off. I haven't had a holiday for 2 years.
Wow.
Sometimes up to 4 Zooms a day, virtual lectures, talks like this, podcasts. I've got the Hopecast, and interviews, and lots of writing to be done, and lots of millions of emails. But the positive side of it, apart from being totally exhausted, is the fact that I'm told I've reached literally 1 million small people in many more countries. So we've started Jane Goodall Institutes in India, Turkey, and Israel just during the pandemic. I don't know how many more roots in many more countries. So it's definitely been worth it. And I miss desperately the face-to-face. I'm a sort of person who loves, I've got friends all over the world, and I miss meeting with them. I miss having the little evenings when you tell stories and drink some red wine, sometimes at midnight after a lecture. And but you just have to do what the situation demands of you at the time and try to make the best out of whatever that situation is. And
It seems,
I think growing up in World War II, it's helped me to have hope, because there was several months, if not a year, when Britain stood alone against the might of Nazi Germany. The other European countries had either been defeated or they'd capitulated, like France. And Britain was prepared for war because of Chamberlain. We had brave young men going out in airplanes, but we didn't have a really well-armed navy or army. But we had Churchill. And Churchill wasn't a saint by any manner of means, but what he was able to do was to rouse the spirit of the British people, just as the president of Ukraine is doing now in Ukraine. We will not be defeated. And I was interested that both this president and the previous president of Ukraine quoted Shakespeare, quoted Churchill. And so this means I can have hope when it seems hopeless, because we lived through hopelessness and triumphed over it. And I think that's bound to affect a child.
well, it certainly affects all of us to hear you share that. And I'll just say that as far as this reaching millions of people, there's a teaching in the Jerusalem Talmud that says anyone who destroys even one life destroys a world, but someone who saves one life saves an entire world. Jane, think about how many worlds you've saved because you've inspired us. Jane, we appreciate you. We are walking out of here today, different people inspired by hope, because hope means action, and we're ready to take action in this world in a hopeful way. Thank you, Jane Goodall.
Well, thank you for inviting me and listening to me. And, thank
Jane,
you.
you're getting a standing ovation.
See you all now. Thank you, all of you.
By the way, Jane, you're getting a standing ovation that was led by our youth.
Thank you, all of you. And please, let's collaborate with Roots and Shoots. Yes, yes, yes.